Gathering the Nations with Jessica Ariani.
All right, let's focus on the words of our covenant. How about that? Let's focus on the King of Kings.
Yes,
which, by the way,
please.
do we understand what King of Kings means and why they put that title above Yahusha? Does anybody know why that term is their King of Kings? And why was Cyrus called a King of Kings? Like, is it a bad thing to say somebody is a king of a king? Well, I think I just gave you the answer. So remember, the scepter was given to Judah by Jacob. That means the right to rule. We're going to actually look at the word scepter. It's fascinating. But Judah was given the right to rule. So that means through the right of succession. That means that the firstborn would succeed the previous rule, and so forth and so on. So the firstborn, that's a monarchy, right? And so when Yahusha comes through that line of Judah, he's Shiloh. When Shiloh comes, the scepter is placed in his hand, and that line is put to a halt. The physical flesh and blood line of Judah is halted. It's not stopped, but it's halted, because there has to now be something that's accomplished, and we're going to get into that. So Yahusha now has the scepter, and he becomes the King of Kings, the King of Judah, the King of Kings. That's what that means. All right, so back to the sovereignty of Yahuah and why he gives Abraham a new name. It's right there. And why he gives Jacob the name Israel. Two things are going to happen. So, and it really does have everything to do with why Joseph is implanted. Can we see? He's an implant. He's a seed that is being sown into Egypt in order to fulfill a prophecy or a promise that Yah made with Abraham. Now, Abraham, despite Strong's concordance, the name Abraham in Aramaic comes from it's a compound, comes from three words. Ab, father, Rab, great, and Hama, many, Abrahama. So, and then he says, so Yah specifically says in 17:5, I am going to now call you Abraham. Because, and he specifically says, you're going to be the father, many nations, of great nations, right? We're going to look at this concept of a great nation and a multitude. This is important because guess what? If truly we are being called out of something, I assure you that the clarity is found in this. That first Yah would, just like out of Babylon, when they were dispersed and they were released after the 70 years, under Cyrus, under the Medo-Persian rule, when they dispersed, who knows who came out first? So southern tribes came out. It was predominantly Levi. Who is the southern tribes? Who knows?
Judah, Benjamin, some Simeon, and Levi.
So there's a controversy about Simeon. I'm glad that you brought that up. Very good, sister. So there's a controversy. So some say that Simeon some of Simeon came out with the southern tribes, but that a large majority remained in the northern. Who knows why Benjamin was always tagging along with Judah? Who knows? Why was Benjamin part of the southern tribe? Well, it's because of the covenant that was made between David and Jonathan, right? Jonathan was from the tribe of Benjamin, and David was from the line of Judah. And they made a covenant, a compact, a league in which it was a league of friendship that would not be broken. Remember, he promised. Why? It had to do with succession. Because by right of succession, Jonathan should have been the next king, because when his father passed or when his father died, he should have, by right of succession, he should have been the king. But he knew and he acknowledged David as the heir to the throne, and he submitted. Okay, legally he abdicated, and so it means to renounce, to fail to fulfill or undertake a responsibility or duty of a monarch, to renounce the throne. So that's what Jonathan did. So Jonathan abdicated to David, but he said, listen, I know that later on my seed line might rise up, stage a coup against you and overthrow you for the throne. If that happens, David, promise me you won't wholesale slaughter my seed. So David says to him, listen, if this does happen, I assure you that your seed will remain alive. Your name will remain amongst the Benjamites. So this does actually happen. Later on, we see that the sons of Jonathan, they do stage a coup, but David has them only arrested. He does not have them put to death. All right, so back to the concept of establishing a nation, right? So he says to Abraham, listen, you're going to be the father. You're going to have of your own miod, of your own seed, you're going to have kings and priests. You're going to have a name, a people, and a land governing, and also many nations. So you see two prophecies. So bringing it back to what I was saying earlier, if the southern tribes came out first, they came out to do what? To establish a house, or to put together something so that the rest could come out, right? It was to lay the foundation. So in the grand scheme of things, for the last 15, 20 years, who do you think Yah has been calling out? And they didn't come out all at once. They came out in increments. And some of the northern tribes did come out too. They came out later, and they settled amongst the Hellen population, the Greeks. Okay, in Samaria, which was the capital, they settled there, and they became known as the Hellenized Jews. They became philosophically, diplomatically Hellenized, okay? They became Democrats. And so this is why Paul, when he's dealing with Asia, when he's dealing with these regions like Corinth and Ephesus and Galatia and Rome, not Rome, that's the Republic, but when he's dealing with them, this is why he is constantly talking about philosophies, who has bewitched you, and he's talking about those systems of philosophy, those systems of government in which they are being swayed back into. Why are you falling asleep? Stay awake. Resist the illusion of freedom. There's no freedom in that system. You are to have nothing to do with the systems of this world. Do not make friendship with Sophia, with the systems of this world. Why are you all arguing amongst yourselves? Why are you debating? If the spirit of Amunah and the spirit of Emet, if the spirit of truth is working in you, then it's not you that comes into one accord, but the spirit that brings you all into one accord. Come on. Okay, so there are two things happening. We see this first in the natural, then in the spiritual. There was already a coming out physically, and a scattering and a gathering. So that means that same pattern is going to happen, that Yah is going to establish supernaturally, spiritually, his people, Judah, or he's going to lay the foundation in order to gather the nations back to him, to fulfill the promise that was made here in Genesis. So who does the gathering? All right, so we're going to look at a pattern here of scattering and gathering. Now, Mario, I'm sure that you're familiar with sowing and reaping. Yeah, right. Sowing and reaping. A farmer. Those are farmers' terms, right? Yeah. So what does a farmer do with his seed? He does what?
That's the scatterage, yeah.
That's right. And how many know that the word parabolo, the Latin word parabolo, or parable, it's a farming term. It means, it's an agricultural, it means to cast your seed. Parable, broadcast, in order to bring something into the present. So to broadcast. So that's what we see, like these newscasters, they're broadcasting their seed. So the seed is the word. Yeshua says the seed is the word. All right. Okay. So we know then the principle of sowing and reaping, something must have been sown in order to reap it, in order to farm it, in order to cultivate it, right? So I bet you didn't know, but we're going to find out today that the responsibility of gathering the people was given to Judah. Judah was prophesied that the Gentiles would come in through Judah. Why? Because Judah's the lawgiver, right? And Levi's the lawgiver. Makes sense to me. We're going to look at that. But who's the crowning glory of Judah? Who's the head? The King of Kings? It would be Yahusha. So let's look at that, okay? And so remember, this is the prophecy. Where is it? The prophecy that's given to Abraham, that he is going to have his own patronymic, that means to give a name to a son, and he's going to give it to his own seed, but then he's also going to be the father of many nations. So that means that out of that seed will come a branch or an offshoot. Okay, just think like this, and then think of an offshoot. Okay. So we see that in Romans chapter 4:13, it says, for the promises that were given to Abraham and his offspring, that what was the promise? That he would be the heir of the world, was not given through the law, but through the righteousness that comes by faith. Now, how many know that that's extremely important to interpret properly? Paul is not removing efficacy from the law. What he's saying is that the promise that he would become the father, the heir of the world, when we talked about what that world is, the age, that he would become the heir, that he would what is an heir? Heir, what is the word inheritance? Heir means the one who receives the inheritance. That the word inheritance means that the property by which it's being transferred. What is being transferred and to whom? So the inheritance is being transferred to the heir, the inheritance, okay? So that's what an heir means. So it means that Abraham would inherit something through his offspring, and they would be the inheritors. Yah put the burden of responsibility upon himself. Abraham had no obligation whatsoever. He was not obligated, only that he obey by faith. Abraham, leave your father's house, leave his name, come follow me. That's it. Follow me. That's all that was required, was that Abraham obey, believe that I'm going to do these things. And he remained faithful to the promise. After how many years? Then he had Abraham, he had Isaac, he had Ishmael. So we see after decades and decades, he did not waver. He remained committed to Yah's promises. But it was not by the giving of the law. That didn't come until later. There was a law at work, yes, because Yah is righteous. So the law of righteousness was working in Abraham, was working in Noah, was working even from Genesis. The law of righteousness, right ruling, that is the ability to establish right ruling. We talked about this too. What does Genesis represent? What does the garden represent? It is the garden, is that place of counsel. It is the pavilion of Yah. It's where his throne is. So when he created the man as the Obed, the servant, the vassal, to do what? To have dominion. What do you think dominion means? We talked about this domination, to have dominion, to rule over, to be a ruler on the earth. How could he be a ruler if he did? That's why he gave him his ruach, the spirit of wisdom that gave him life, so that he would know how to govern. That's the spirit of righteousness, or the law of righteousness. Just like Moses. Moses didn't have all the laws at once. It was when a case was presented to him, he would hear the case, and then he says he would inquire of Yahuah, and Yah would give him wisdom and a verdict. And then it would become case law or precedent. It would be established as a law. Okay, let's move through this. The reason why I brought this back up is because, again, to give a name means, back then in the ancient Near East, the ANE, back then, remember, they didn't names and how they functioned. They didn't have last names. Very few, only the wealthy and the freeborn had patronymy. What nimi means, nimon means nomos, and from name, right? To name something. Patros or padre is patro, meaning father's name. So this is why we see often that they came in their father's name. We also see this relevant with Yahusha. He came in his father's name. So the population was not dense yet. There wasn't a lot of people in Mesopotamia. They were fresh off the boat in Ararat, which is now modern day Turkey. They're fresh off the boat. They're migrating down into Mesopotamia, which will then later be known as Babylon. Northern and southern Babylon split into Mesopotamia. And then we see Akkad. So Noah's sons, only being 3, went out, and then they began to populate. And as they populated and as they settled in the areas and they began to, learn agriculture because of those 2 great rivers, they began to flourish as a people. And this is how city-states were born. This is how leadership, lugos, were born. Okay, so we see that completed through Jacob or through Jacob, right? So here in Genesis 33:28, he says, and your name shall be called no more Jacob or Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince you have power with Elohim and with men and have prevailed. Now I showed you the comparison between the prince and the power of this air or this world, and then the prince, this particular prince here, we saw that juxtaposed in the video, right? So I broke it down in that video what Yashar or Israel actually means. So Yashar is where we get the word upright, to be straight, to be upright. And again, this has to do with his ability to rule upright. What does Yahusha say? I come to make your crooked ways. The serpent is crooked. So it's not really about an adder or about an actual reptile, but about a crooked speech, the speech of the tongue, the split tongue that causes confusion, right? Double-mindedness. Why? Because a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. He has duplicity. There's internal conflict, the conflict that Paul was talking about. He can ask for nothing. He can do nothing. So one day milk is good, one day milk is bad, right? It's this constant internal yes and no, good and evil, right and wrong. It's knowledge that puffs up, but it does not have the weight to perform or there's no efficacy. It's vain. And all it does is entertain the imaginations of the mind, which is what Yahusha says we have to pull down, humble, bring low. So Yashar means it's a concept, it's an idiomatic expression of right ruling. That means to have a spine, to have a straight spine, to sit upright, to be upright. That means to be ethically and morally virtuous. See, when we think even about Ahab, right? And I know we've heard lots of Christian teaching. Again, they're hiding in plain sight. They don't want us to understand these things, but Ahab was a weak man and Jezebel was a dominant woman controlling. That's actually not even culturally true, not even close to true. First and foremost, if she had any kind of power or authority, she wouldn't have had to forge her husband's name. We're not here to talk about that right now, but she had to forge. That means she didn't have any authority. She also had to lie about her accusations against Nadab, okay, or Naboth. I'm sorry, Naboth. So again, this is not culturally true. What it means that he was weak or that he pouted, which is where most people get this concept of him being weak-spined or, a yes, ma'am kind of guy. That's not what happened. It says that he was a tyrant. He was a brutal, violent man. It says that his father was wicked and campaigned in the art of war. He was a master at campaigning for war, violent. Okay. And it says that Ahab was worse than him. He was one of the most wicked kings of all. I can assure you that he wasn't very persuaded by his wife's, rule. Not at all. What made him a weak man was sin, his compromise. He was compromised. When a man or a leader is compromised, they will surround themselves with others who are compromised in order to hide their sin. They are not going to put counselors who have wisdom and integrity, right? That are going to hold them accountable. That's why they killed all the prophets. That's why he wanted all the prophets killed and all the prophets gone. That's why he came against Eliyahu. And he even gassed the first concept of gaslighting. Look, behold, the troubler of Israel. That's what he said. And he had all the people convinced that Eliyahu was in fact the troubler, when he was in fact the one who was causing trouble to Israel. So you get it, right? So sin is what weakens a leader. Compromise is what weakens. But what is an upright leader then? One who has virtue, integrity, wisdom, all the principles of Yahusha, right? Without sin, upright, moral and ethical virtue, integrity. And did David have those attributes? Absolutely. Did David fail? Yes, out of ignorance. It's a difference. Because his desire was to do, he said, man after my own heart. Ani li dodi dodili, my beloved, right? Dodi is David, my beloved, after my heart. He desires to do what is right. He may not always know, and he may obviously give into, subsequently, his weakness, the weakness of his flesh. The flesh is weak because of sin. It's a thorn. Sin causes our flesh to be weak. The Ruach in the eyes of Yah is not weak, but capable. It's capable. This is why we are implored to walk or to abide in the Spirit, so that we can have efficacy, so that we are capable to be doers of the word, not just hearers. So Yashar, he's giving him a name, and he says, because you are going to rule upright, you're going to, through your line will come justice and equity, and that's what the law is. Now, moving on, Genesis 35, 10 through 12. And so again, he says, I am El Shaddai, okay? I am the strength of the covenant in order to keep this promise. And then he tells them, you will be fruitful and you will multiply. And he reiterates to Jacob the very promise that he gave. We see the actual, a portion of the promise being fulfilled in him. We see that this is now progressing as the promise is becoming more complete. If something is established, if you know anything about prophecy, you know there's perfect and imperfect. Imperfect means that it's still not complete. It hasn't reached its end. And perfect means that it has become prophesied, done, right? A prophecy fulfilled. So when Yahuwah, this is beautiful, because when Yahuwah says to Abraham, these things, it was initiated. It was put into, it was called self-imprecating. It was put in, he imprecated himself under the oath, Yahuwah did, and it goes into effect. Now, through the course of time, we see that it's becoming full, it's becoming perfect, it's maturating. So when Yahusha's on the stake, he says, it is finished. He's talking about all, that's why he said all the law and all the prophets were speaking of me. He's bringing to fruition, he's making it full or complete, perfect. Now we, through the course of time, are working through those prophecies little by little. We are recognizing the fullness of them. So when he here is telling Jacob, listen, there's this is already, we're seeing the fullness of the promise that I made to Abraham in you, Jacob. You're going to be on the strength of the covenant that I'm going to make with your offspring. And that promise is to make you a nation. But then he says, even also, not just you becoming a nation, but also a company of nations. This is what he tells Abraham. You will be the father. You're going to have your own, which is through Isaac, Ishak, but also the father of many nations. And that is where we get this concept of a company. Here, Rab, Hama, and then the Gadol nations, okay? Rab Gadol, we're gonna look at that, it's so cool. So this is why this last video I put out was to break down company. What does it mean here, company? And then we're gonna just look at Joseph's, the two dreams. It says here, a company of nations. So the word for company is kahal. right? A unified assembly called together. Now, I'm not going to break down democracy and republic, Greece and Rome. I'm not going to do that, since you can just go back and watch the video. So I want you to focus on this right here. So remember, he says, I'm going to create in you a company of nations as well. All right, I just want you to focus on that. So now, what is this posterity of Abraham? Okay, so remember, the posterity means the seed line. So let me ask you all a question. So right before Genesis, let's go there. Right before Genesis 39, what's the chapter? And it's so odd. You would think, why is it there? So who remembers what's right before this chapter, chapter 39? So we go from all of Genesis 35, 36, 37, talking about Joseph, and then he gets thrown in the pit and all these things, Bilhah and Zilpah and all the things. And then all of a sudden it just, he gets sold. He gets sold, right? And then he gets sold into Egypt, right? They take him, the Ishmaelites take him by the Amorites. And then all of a sudden you would think that it would go right fluidly into, now he's in Potiphar's house. But we see this Judah and Tamar. And the story of Judah and Tamar, and then boom, right back to Joseph. Let's use our critical thinking here. Why do you think it did that? Why do you think the narrators, the authors, did that? So it's a record, remember, right, of succession. Who has the right to succeed to the throne next? It's in Numbers chapter 27, where Moses is giving out through succession the land and property. And then remember the daughters of Zelophehad, they also through succession. And then there's a governing rule there in the Torah that women can in fact receive property if there are no sons born to the father, in order to maintain the father's line. And then Moses says that Yah has determined that if they marry, they have to marry within their own tribes in order to keep it part of the property in the tribal line. So it's called the right of succession. It's called also, the succession goes to the firstborn, and the firstborn usually would receive a double portion, which was the blessings and the right for rulership. So the reason why this comes in, this is important, because remember that branch, and then remember that vine that comes, that offspring that comes out, that offshoot, right? So we are told here, this is profound, we are told Judah's lineage because of kingship, because remember he says, and kings will come from you, nations of kings. Remember, it's in the book of Revelation, it ends with the kings of the earth, the kings of the nation coming to bring what? Tribute. And we see these two all throughout the book of Revelation. First, it's the great nations that come in and get white robes. And then we see the 144,000, and they're all sealed because it's complete. That's it. That's a promise that was made to Abraham, is Yasakevo. That's it. No more. That's it. It's all done. And then the nations that ridicule, the powers of the earth that ridicule, they have their day in court. Making sense? Is it making sense? So that's why Judah and Tamar, that this is a record of lineage. That's why it ends here of giving the names. Why? Because Genesis 38 is Judah's line established through Perez and Zerah, the seed that breaks the breach. Come on. Yahusha is going to repair. Later, we did this already, but he repairs the breach that was broken, right? Because of the seed from the serpent. So we see Genesis 38. So it says Boaz begets Obed. Ultimately, there's a whole lineage in Chronicles and other verses, but I'm just going to break it down to show you what it points to. Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Yishi. Yishi was the father of King David. There it is. That's why that little clip is in there. Now in Genesis 49:10, again, later when Jacob is in Egypt with Joseph, he is doing the right hand blessing, right? Remember, the right hand is the authority. It's the power. It's the efficacy to lay hands on. We'll talk about that too. When Paul is saying, don't be so quick, Timothy, to place hands, or when they are ordaining, or it's called being made, when they are making someone, they are to put the right hand, they're to put hands on them. The Pentecostal world, where I came from too, you know, they'd be laying hands on you, you know, lay hands on the sick and all the things. But I mean, it was just really grossly misinterpreted. It was used predominantly for ordination, to lay hands on the head. So when Joseph does the right hand blessing, he does the double blessing, he takes it and he blesses the younger. But in Genesis 49:10, when he's delegating, that's part of the succession, he's giving each elder son, and he's giving them their blessings, right? Their portion. And so he says to Judah, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the staff from between his feet. Ever? Ever? No. Until, just like the Levitical line, we don't talk about this, right? The line of Levi came to an end because there was a greater priest. That means that it became complete. It served its purpose. And now the order of Melchizedek, that is Yahusha, the great high priest, is now working in its stead. So then we see the same thing with Judah. So he becomes the great high priest, and then he becomes the king of kings. Levi and Judah, wow, king and a priest, and a nation of kings and priests. So right here, he says that the scepter is not going to, until Shiloh comes, watch this, but that's still not the end of it. Until Shiloh comes and the allegiance of the nations becomes his. When does that happen? When does that happen? It actually happens in the book of Revelation. Again, when we reach a head, when we come to a conclusion of all things. So now Genesis 45:7, it says, in Genesis 45. So this is Joseph now. We remember we went over this last week. We went over Genesis 39. We read through it. Our brother Bruce read us through. We talked about all the nuances here, but now we're going to talk about the spiritual part of it, okay? We talked about, you know, being prospered and how Yah was with him, and that's why he prospered. So we talked about the natural application. Now we're looking at the spiritual application and why Joseph was transplanted. He was planted there. How many know that Joseph was the head, the chief seed in Egypt, so that all the children could come in, just like it was prophesied that for 4 generations, your seed, Abraham, will go into a place they will be enslaved, but I will bring them out by a mighty hand of deliverance, all the things, right? 400 years. So we see this already, a seed being sown, but why do they have to go? Think about it, because we like, why do they have to do that? We were looking at, was it 70 souls, 75? It was a very small group of people that went into Egypt with Jacob and his sons, right? It's like 70 something people when Joseph brought them in through the famine. 70 something people. Was that enough people to go in and take Canaan? No. The Canaanites were massive, right? The Canaanites, there was the Gigabites, the Jebusites, the Hittites, all of the 70 people, they would have been slaughtered wholesale. So what is, it's like an incubation, right? He puts them into Egypt, and while they're there for a time and a being, they prosper and they become a multitude of people, mixed and integrated. They become a massive company, millions strong. Egypt actually prospers as a result of Joseph's presence. So now Joseph is there, Genesis 45, verse 7. And Joseph recognizes, this is way later, we're in 39, but he says to them, listen, brothers, wisdom tells me that you did not do this to me. I'm not a victim, right? But rather I recognize the purpose of it all. That Yahuah himself has sent me before you to preserve a posterity in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Okay, two things. Remember, there's two promises that have to be fulfilled. What about the Gentiles? So to preserve a posterity and to save your lives. See something here? So he says, so now I see it was not you that sent me here, but Yahuah. So what is the word for posterity here? Well, I'm giving an example of those 70 souls. Guess what? It's the word sharet, which means a portion or a remnant. So he says that I've been sent here to preserve a remnant and to preserve Israel. Wow. Who's that remnant? So now let's look at, again, the right hand blessing. So Ephraim and Manasseh, who are they? So in Genesis 48:16, it says, and so remember, again, Jacob, when we get there, we'll review it again. But for the sake of understanding, I'm bringing it up. Jacob is blessing his 12 sons. He's going to die soon. Well, he doesn't die until later, but he's still giving them their portion or their blessings. Okay? Their inheritance, spiritual inheritance. So at this time, he calls Joseph. He says, I want to meet your sons. He brings them in. He prophesies over them, or he establishes the word. And he says, and may they be called by my name. So look at, he's giving them, why a nation? He knows what he's saying here. That, Zaphnath Paneah. When we talk about slavery portion, I'll tell you why Joseph had to be named by the Egyptians. Zaphnath Paneah. But because so he can identify as an Egyptian. Moses, when he was called Moses, that's not a Hebrew name. In fact, that's not even the name that they gave him, but it was an Egyptian name, right? So that he could identify with the nation or the people. Remember, names are identification markers. Who? Joseph. Who? John. Oh, who? What John? John Sanchez. Oh, that guy. They're markers. They are identity. To identify you. When you get pulled over, they said you have an ID. They want to see your name. They want to see who you are. What else are they looking at other than do you have a valid driver's license to drive? But what if you're walking down the street and they say, do you have any identification on you? Identification. What's on your identification? Your name. It identifies you because then they can run your name to see if you have any warrants, right? Because all that's attached to your name. So he says, may they be called by my name. So they're going to become part of the nation. Watch this. And the names of my father, Abraham and Isaac. And watch this. And may they grow into a multitude. Remember, Ab, Rab, Hama, Rab. So he says, I'm going to give them my name. So under my hegemony, my hegemony, my rule, they will be a Rab upon the earth. And so he blesses Ephraim, the younger one. And Joseph is concerned. And he says, no, he's not the eldest. The eldest should get the first, the double portion. He says, listen, I know Ephraim, the younger one, shall be greater. Jacob says to Joseph, Ephraim will be greater than his brother, and his offspring shall become the what? The fullness of the nation. And that takes us back to this word. When I break it down right now, I'll show you. Many means fullness. And I just explained to you that to complete or to make something full, to bring it to its fullness, to complete it. May he be the completion or the fullness of the Gentiles. Now, remember, I told you that was given to Judah right here, Genesis 38. And the scepter will not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes, and the allegiance, the obedience of the nations is his. So we see then He's saying they're going to become a multitude on the earth. The younger one, Ephraim, the younger brother, Ephraim, until his offspring become the fullness of the nations, until Yahusha brings in, or until the truth, until they are brought in, okay? Brought back home. You're going to have to bring Ephraim home. He's lost. You're going to bring Ephraim home. Now, what does Romans 11:25 say? Now, Paul is actually, he understands this now, especially because he has been sent out to accomplish this, to establish, to start it. And he says, look, you Gentiles, I do not want you to be ignorant, he says to them, of this mystery, brothers. These are the Gentiles, the Romans, and all those who were in that province. He says, so that you will not be conceited. He says, what's happening here is that there is a hardening in the part that has come to Yasharel, or to Israel, until the fullness of the nations has come in. Good, good. All right, I'm going to kind of flow through this one real quick, because again, I was just establishing, I just want to keep reiterating, giving you these terms over and over and over again until you get that kingdom mindset. I loved what sister said, that now, everywhere she reads now and she sees it everywhere now, right? All these terms, like, what? How did I not see it before? So I'm going to keep reiterating. So let's go real quick. So it says here, Genesis 39, verse 1. So remember, Potiphar is an officer of Pharaoh. He's captain of the guard. So whatever the case is, Joseph is there. And Joseph has found favor with Potiphar, right? And Yahuah caused Joseph to prosper in his company, or under his possession. So don't forget that Joseph specifically says later on that he knows why he's there. He knows that he is going to do something. He's going to preserve a posterity and preserve the lives of his brothers, right? And then we see that that posterity is going to come through Ephraim, okay? And that the preservation of Israel is going to come through Judah. All right. So basically we talked about this, the divine right to rule, and why he was accountable to Yah. Okay. So really quick, I want to give you another illustration of the divine right to rule. What did Solomon ask for to rule the people when he prayed and he asked that I'll give you anything you ask? So wisdom, to inquire of Yahuah on how. What would Moses do? He would do what to find the answer? He didn't cry out, he inquired. So know the difference, okay? So whenever you're in a position of leadership and you don't know what to do because there's a dilemma, there's conflict, you have to make a decision between two things. You don't know right from wrong. You don't know what to do. You're then to inquire, Yah, help me, show me how to help this, to manage, because you don't know the hearts of people. Yah says, I don't care if it's your wife or your children. That's presumptuous to think that we know their heart. We don't know their intent either. We have to be careful with also charging them. Okay, inquire and then cry out is different. When you cry out, it's for Yah to see the sin, to see the issue and deal with that person. Okay, all right, let's move on really quick. So the divine right to rule, that was that, just a little segue there. So this is really cool. And so I'm only going to go over these two things, dream 1 and dream 2. So far we've sort of established that there's something going on here with Joseph being planted in Egypt, right? That Yah made a promise to Abraham. Yah promises Abraham that he's going to establish a nation, and that from that nation is going to come a multitude of nations. And now we see that we're at the juncture where Joseph is the part of the fulfillment where Joseph is now going to be a seed that's going to split off, right? To become the multitude of nations through Ephraim. Now, remember, Joseph has dreams. Now, it's interesting because we've been taught to just sort of gloss over Genesis 37, because when he shares his dreams first with his brothers, they mock him and they rebuke him. And then we get like a synopsis of the interpretation, right? So are you saying that we're going to bow down to you? And then he gives the second dream, right, to his dad, and he's like, well, are you saying that me and your mother and your brothers are going to bow down to you? And then so we never really go farther because we assume, well, that's exactly what it was. It must be what it is. They're going to bow down. And then we see it being fulfilled, and they do bow down. But there's more. And remember, I'm going to go into greater detail next Tuesday when I present. So if we recall the dream, it was basically that the sun, we're going to start the beginning from the end. And you shall know the beginning from the end. So we're going to start from the end. We're going to start from dream 2, and it's phenomenal. Dream 2. So the second dream, he says, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance. That means that they honored. Obeisance, to bow down is to give honor. Okay, it was a form of tribute or honor. Today in Africa, you have I have friends that are from Africa. They bow down when they see their parents. They'll get down to the feet. They get low to their parents, their own parents. They'll kiss. Sometimes in India, they'll kiss the feet. So it was a way of honoring. I want you to note honor. So he says that the sun and the moon and the 11 stars give honor to Joseph. Jacob rebukes him, saying, shall he and his mother and brothers bow down to him on the earth? Because you're supposed to honor your mother and your father, right? So it's not the normal procession of authority. Honor your mother, right? Bless your children, right? And Joseph's brother envied him, but Jacob observed. But he said, well, I'm going to hold on to it. I'm going to observe it. I'm going to pay attention to it. Now, in 1 Corinthians 15:40-45, we see something that's very similar. It says this, but it's speaking here of heavenly bodies and earthly bodies. Now, you notice he says, are the heavenly going to bow down to the earthly? So what are these heavenly and what are these earthly? And then what is this splendor, this obeisance, right? So he says there are also heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the splendor of the heavenly bodies is of 1 degree. And the splendor of the earthly bodies is of another. The sun has 1 degree of splendor, the moon another, and the stars another. And star differs from star in splendor. So will it be with the resurrection of the dead. Okay? What is sown is perishable. It is raised imperishable. It is sown in dishonor, but raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, and it is raised in power. Like Joseph, he was sown into Egypt as a slave in weakness, but raised up in power. It is sown a natural body, Israel, Jacob, but will be raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. You see, we're going to see natural Israel and then the spirit, first in the natural, then in the spiritual. And the two become one new man. So he's saying there is also a spiritual body. So it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, a life-giving spirit. Now, I'm going to break this all down, but let's look at the word first for splendor here. Now, it's the Greek word doxa, and it means dignity, honor, and praise. Dignity, honor, and praise. So Joseph is saying that his father and mother, was his mother alive at that time? No. He had a wet nurse, which would have been Belha, or one of the wives, right? The midwives. So they could have, acted as wet nurses or as mothers, but his mom wasn't alive. And I know that I've tried to research, and there's all these people trying to speculate. So he must be talking about something else. So who's the patriarch and the matriarch of their faith? It's that simple. Abraham and Sarah. Right? The promise was given to Abraham. And so right here, he's saying that the honor, his life, his purpose there's going to be honor ascribed to him. That's whatever was sown before, whatever was established through his patriarch and matriarch through the line is going to come through and have honor. We're going to see it, okay? I won't give you too much. Yes, it does make sense, Amanda. So what is the prophecy? Let's just hold on to some of these things. So now the prophecy that's given to Abraham, Genesis 15, 13 through 16, it says, well, remember that Abraham would have many descendants, that those descendants would one day be taken captive and treated harshly, and that in the fourth generation, Abraham's descendants would return to Canaan, and that their return would coincide with Yahuwah's judgment on the Amorites in Canaan, and then in 17:4, that he would be the father of many nations. So this is the summary of prophecy given to Abraham, the promise. These are the promises, actually. We won't call them prophecy. We'll say promise. Now in Genesis 22:17, he says to him, Abraham, I will surely bless you, and I will multiply your descendants like the stars in the sky. Who? Abraham. It wasn't about Jacob, but it wasn't. Abraham's seed would be the stars. It was about the multitudes, not necessarily Jacob. The second one is about, we'll see right now. Watch. So he says, I will multiply your descendants like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will possess the gates of their enemies. Wow, the gates. Y'all know what gates means, right? Well, a gate, the city gates in the city, is where legislation was established, laws, ordinances, precepts, things like that. It's where the aristocrats and the nobles and the kings, it's where they dwelt. It was also the marketplace. So if there was ever a covenant or a treaty or some agreement that was made, it would be made in the city gates because of the witnesses. They didn't have writing back then. They didn't write things on paper. So it was usually with the 2 or 3 witnesses that would establish it. And so there in the gates, it represents, the city gates represents a place of government. So if you think right here, and that your descendants will do what? They're going to possess the gates, the governments of their enemy. Okay. Hebrews 11:12. Let's go there real quick. Therefore sprang there even of one and him a good, as good as dead. As good as dead. So many as the stars of the sky in multitude, and as the sand which is by the sea innumerable. So again, we see that this had to do with Sarah, and it had to do with Abraham. Look, Abraham and Sarah and the stars, the sun, the moon, and the stars, the glory, Abraham, Sarah, you see, Abraham, Sarah, and their stars. The stars of the sky is a multitude. You see that? A plethora. The multitude, the multitudes. What does it say, you guys? A fullness. The fullness of this population. A great number. This is going to get really cool. And again, I'll break it down even more later. So ultimately, this dream that he's having right here about this obeisance, the sun, the moon, and stars, is really talking about Joseph's line through Ephraim will represent the Gentiles, who Ephraim will become part of the Gentiles, and so will Manasseh. They will become part of the Gentiles under Israel's name, not the wicked Gentiles that rage, not the serpent seed, not the sons. What does it mean, seed? Remember, Benai, Ami, son of my people. They don't have to be actual genetic DNA seed of reptilian blood. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, again, we're understanding monarchical terms. So if that means that the power that vests them, they are then sons. Because they have to be vested, they have to inherit. So sons of Satan are those that are vested by the power of Satan. That's why Yeshua said, if I cast out devils by the power of devils, then a house divided will not stand. So Joseph's line through Ephraim will represent the Gentiles who were also promised to Abraham. So the dream is a reference to Israel yielding to the Gentiles. I want you to get that. That's where the hardness of in part comes in. That means that there's going to be a time where Israel is going to yield and the Gentiles are going to be honored. Doxa. they're going to be the fullness, the conclusion of God's glory and the promise. That's hard, right? So the dream is a reference to Israel yielding to the Gentiles. That's why Jacob says, what? Until the fullness, until the fullness. Now in Genesis 48, 18 through 19, remember Joseph says, not so, my father. This one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused. I know, my son, I know, he said. He too shall become greater than he, and his offspring shall become the fullness of the nations. Now, the word for fullness, this is really cool, is melo. It means to put it in the hand, to fulfill the fullness of hand, to fill the hand. That which fills the hand. Multitudes. Melo means multitudes in the hand. Okay. Now in Deuteronomy 16:16, it says 3 times in a year shall you appear before Yahuah to do what? What time is this? If you have to appear before Yah, what does that mean? It's what season? It's what kind of season?
A Moedim, yeah.
That's right, Gay. It's harvest time, right? You got to bring your harvest 3 times a year. And then what? He says, you shall not appear what? You shall not appear empty-handed. Your hands shall be full. Come on. Your baskets shall be full, right? Bring the overflow. Come on. Now in Romans 11:24 through 25, it says, for if you, now remember, he's telling Romans, Paul is telling the Gentiles not to get conceited because there's a hardness in part until the fullness is complete, until they've all been gathered. What do you gather when you're bringing in a harvest? Come on. Come on. So they're part of the harvest and we're supposed to gather. What are we gathering? The nations. What is the nations? The harvest. Romans 11:24 through 25 says, for if you were cut from a wild olive tree, remember? And contrary, he's telling the Gentiles, you were cut from a wild olive tree, and contrary to nature were grafted into, that's what Ephraim and Manasseh, they were grafted in through adoption, right? Grafted into one that is cultivated. How much more readily will these, the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers, so that you will not be conceited. A hardening in part has come to Israel until the hand is full, the right hand, until the hand is full of Gentiles to come in and the promise is complete. Come on. Matthew 9:36 through 38 says, and when, look at this, what does Yahushua say? Because he's dealing with real Israel at this time. He's gathering his sheep. How many know that when they came out of Babylon, because of the teachings and the doctrines of the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, the council of the wicked, because of the presence of Rome and the Hellenization of Greece, because of the democracies and the polyarchs, politics, cities, all the politics that were going on, they were causing schisms, false teachings, all these factions. That's called a schism in religion, a split. And as a result, people were splitting and dividing. Even the kingdom was divided. There were 3 tetrarchs, 3 kings, all dividing. Yahushua comes on the scene and he's establishing order. It literally said that when they came out of Babylon, the people were scattered. Some went to Egypt, some went to this place, some stayed in Persia, some all over the place, right? Some went into Greece and Mesopotamia, some went everywhere. They were scattered. But Yah wasn't talking about physical proximity. He wasn't talking about their personal locale. He was talking about the scattering, the schism of the mind, the split, bringing them back into echad, oneness. The kingdom had never, ever again seen unity, only ever under David. Under King David, the monarchy was unified. It was a unified monarchy. After David, it was split. That's the schism. That's the split. So if a split or a scattering, he literally says, I'm not going to go into today. I already done a teaching on it. But they scattered the people through doctrines and divisions and discord and all the stuff. He literally said, I've come for the lost sheep. He's the shepherd with the hook, with the right hand, to bring them into his custody, to bring them back into order, that they would be one with me as I am one with you. Echad, unity. So he comes on the scene, and that's what he's doing. He's gathering. And after he gathers them to himself, he's there for a time. He's there to gather the lost, the scattered sheep of Israel. Then what does he do? Are they lost? Is this concept of the lost sheep of Israel? Are we lost? No, he sends them out. Shelach. There's like a whole Torah portion with the word vayishlach. Vayishlach. And he sent out, because the word shalach is literally the term that's ascribed to a Talmudim. I am teaching you, and just like I was sent out from the Father. So look at this. So they did not understand that he was telling them about the Father. So Yahusha said, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and that I can do nothing on my own, but speak exactly what the Father has taught me. He who sent me out is with me. We are echad because we agree, not because I am him, but because I am in agreement. We are one. There's no schism here. There's no double-mindedness. I am of one mind, one accord, right? The power that's working in me is my Father. He has not left me alone because I always do what pleases him. So what does it say right here? He taught me and then sent me out. So when Yahusha came on the scene, he did what his Father did, what his Father taught him. You teach them and then send them out to go gather the nations. And at the end, there's going to be a great harvest, spiritual now, in which my Israel, my 144,000 are going to bring in the multitudes, and their hands will not be empty. He says, my word will accomplish what I sent it out to do. It will not return empty. Woo! All right, let's close it up. So Matthew 9 says, so Yahusha says, when he saw the crowds, remember, he was constantly differentiating. I don't feed the bread of the children to the dogs, the Gentiles. He was differentiating. I'm here for the scattered sheep, to bring them into one, the echad, so that I can give them my power. The power that the Father gave to me, which is the power, which is the ruach, the authority, I'm going to give it to them. And then I'm going to send them out with that power. And in the end, I'm going to gather them all up together in my baskets. So when he saw the crowds, he said he was moved with compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless. We've talked about this, right? Like sheep with no shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, look, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. That's why I came, because the harvest is ready. It's time. The end has come, where the reapers will reap. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the master of the harvest, therefore, to send out, vayishlach, with his hand, with his right hand, to send out workers into his harvest. You see that? So who are the Gentiles? Who's Ephraim? Who's Manasseh? They're the harvest, to bring them back into the storehouse, to bring them back in. Deuteronomy 11:10-12 says, for the land you go to possess is not as the land of Egypt, from where you came out, where you sowed seed and where your foot watered gardens of herbs. But the land where you go to possess is a land of hills and valleys that drink the water of heaven, and a land which Yahuah, your Elohim, cares for. He is the master of the harvest. That's why our tributary tithes were of the land. That's why we looked at Cain and Abel. Those were not burnt offerings. Those were tribute offerings in which Cain did not bring the fullness of his produce, right? We looked at that. We broke it down. So the master of the harvest is the one who provides the rain and nourishes the soil, who gives the hills and the valleys and cares for them. That's why render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Money for money. Money will take care of you. Then let mammon be your God. It says here, the eyes of Yahuah, your Elohim, are always upon it, from the beginning of the year, even unto the end of the year. From the beginning to the end. And how many know there's only 2 seasons? Who knows what they are?
Winter and summer.
Summer and winter.
Why is that important? Because winter was when they would sow, and summer is when they would reap. Reaping and sowing. I assure you that now you'll understand what Yahushua was talking about when he says the end of the age. It's going to be in the winter. Pray that it's not in the winter. And when you see the figs on the leaves, you know summer is near. He says it all throughout prophecy: winter, summer, winter, summer, winter, summer. Why? Because sowing, reaping, sowing, reaping. It has to do with the harvest. Book of Revelation ends with a massive harvest, right? A beautiful harvest. So we know that he's the master of the harvest. Now let's go back to dream 1. So we see something here. We see a harvest. Isn't that funny? He says, start with dream 2. Let's go to dream 1. You know the end from the beginning. You will know the end of the harvest based on what was sown in the beginning. You will know the end. You will know a tree by its fruit. You will know who's who and what was sown. You will know. You'll look at the fruit and be like, ah, an apple was sown. Ah, wheat, not a tare. You will know the end from the beginning. You will know who is the harvest, because you got to go back to who was sown. Joseph was sown in dishonor, will be raised in the end honorable. So good. So it says here, and now we're going to go to dream 1. So now we just looked at who's the harvest, okay? Okay, Genesis 42:6. This is the second part of it. This is the first part of his dream. So we see that, remember, his first dream was that he told his brothers, hey, I had a dream. Who does Joseph represent in the equation of things? Remember, there's a branch.
The
and that's
offshoot.
wild. Right, the wild branch that was grafted in. Joseph's seed will be grafted into Israel's seed. Why is this so? Because Joseph, Zaphnath Paneah, took on the identity of the Egyptian people. But later we see that he's sown outside of Egypt. But his wife, the mother, so a foreigner or a child, so there were stipulations, right? There were stipulations to those who could serve in the temple, right? Native sons. Ben Ami, to be priests. Ben Ami, let's clarify, not to be kings, but to be priests, right? Because Benjamin, kingly line at one point. Jacob grafts his sons in from a foreign wife, from a foreign woman, grafts them into Israel, gives them his name. He adopted them, by the way. How do we know? We looked at it last time, remember? And because he specifically says, they are mine. That's the concept of adoption. That's why I had it in my notes here. And he says, and whatever issues out from you after this is yours. So he makes a clear distinction saying, these are mine. I'm adopting them. And whatever else is yours. Those are not the Gentiles I'm talking about. Whatever comes out after this, whatever they become, right? The Vikings, Romania, Japan, whatever they become after this, I don't know. So now watch. Remember, they asked the master, they go and sow a bunch of seeds. The seeds were sown, and then the next day they wake up and there's tares, and then he says, who has done this? And they said, the wicked one. So it's about seeds being sown alongside. And now we see that these seeds are people. Joseph was sown in Egypt. And what came out of that was a harvest, was a part of the promise, the fullness of a promise made to Abraham. But remember, servants, and why they had to be adopted and grafted in. So it says, the eyes of Yahuwah, your Elohim, are always upon us. So dream 1. So remember, we do see this actually happening in the natural, first in the natural, then in the spiritual. Remember that. So we see in Genesis chapter 42, verse 6, it says, and Joseph, now being the governor over the land, and he sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their face to the earth. So it did come to pass. We see it has to be established first in the natural. Why? Because Abraham, by faith in the natural, faith without works is dead. It wasn't by keeping the law. It was by faith. Why is this important, y'all? Let me tell you. How are the Gentiles going to come in? How did the Gentiles come in when Paul was on the scene? Did they come in by keeping the law first? They heard the truth and believed. Then they came into the commonwealth. And then they were taught the laws and the ways of Yah. Does that make sense? But it's first by faith. So that's why he made it so that it would be by faith, that salvation to the Gentiles would come by faith. Genesis 42:9, and Joseph remembered the dream. So when the brothers came in and bowed themselves, they were giving tribute to him. They were paying him honor because of his title as a governor. It did, in fact, come to pass. And it says a couple of verses later, oh, and Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamt of them. He remembered that they were binding sheaves. Now, how many know that these sheaves, when you bind the sheaves, it's called the first fruits? First fruits. And his brothers' sheaves stood round about and made obeisance to his sheaves. And his brothers said to him, shall you reign over us, you Gentiles? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us, you Gentiles? And they hated him even more for his dreams and his words. Now in Exodus 23:16, it says, and the feast of the harvest, that is the first fruits of your labor, which you have sown in the field is the world, Yahushua says, and the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, which is winter harvest, the latter rains, when you have gathered in your labors out of the field. Now the word for harvest there is kasir, and it refers to a fresh bough or sprig springing forth from a stump, an indication of new life. Now, first fruits here is Bikur, and it's the first day on which individuals could bring the Bikurim, or the first fruits, to the temple. Yahushua was the temple. We become the temple. So the grain was ready then for harvest. Summer fruits were beginning to ripen. Summer fruits were beginning to ripen, and Bikurim were brought in. In Exodus 23:10, it says, 6 years shall you sow your land and shall gather in the fruits thereof. But the 7th year you shall let it rest, the final Sabbath. It began with harvesting. So the harvest would begin with first harvesting the barley. Listen to this, y'all, during Passover. And then it would end with harvesting the wheat at Shavuot. So we see all of these set appointed times. So the barley is harvested first. What's sown in corruption will be brought forth in glory. Then the harvesting ends with the wheat. So it starts with Passover and it ends with Shavuot. Okay. Israel is the barley and the Gentiles are the wheat. Both will be gathered in, gathering the nations. But there's another harvest. And it's at the end. It's way after the barley, way after the wheat. Who knows what it is? So it's the barley, then the wheat, and then way at the end, it's something called vintage.
Is it grapes?
So if we go now back to the book of Revelation, which is why I'm super excited. Revelation 14:14. So before this, there's a massive multitude that comes in 11, but I don't want to go ahead, but it's in 11:15. And he asks him, who are all these people? And he says, you know, and he says, it's those, the great multitude that has come in and made themselves. But I'll break that down in just a second. Just know that there's a massive multitude. It said every tongue, every tribe, every nation, a great multitude comes in. He says, and then there's 144,000, which is sealed. Okay. And then in this verse 14, then after that is the final harvest. Look at this, y'all. Can you see it? And this is after everything else is harvested. Okay. This is the final harvest. We're going to end in what? Chapter 20 soon, 17, 18, 19, 20. And that's all the things and the saints come. It says, and look, and I looked and behold a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, thrust in your sickle and reap, For the time is come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in the sickle and on the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple which was in heaven, and he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, thrust in your sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth. The nations are drunk, for her grapes are fully ripe. They have drunk from the cup of abomination. Meg, yes, he's been treading the winepress, Christina. And Maggie, you weren't here earlier, but Maggie brought in that verse which says that the nations are drunk. They're intoxicated by her seductions. And another angel came and cried out to him, the grapes are fully ripe. And then the angel thrust in his sickle onto the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of Elohim. And the winepress was trodden where? Outside of the city. And blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horses' bridles, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. Wow. All right, so Israel the barley, Gentiles are the wheat, and the lawless ones are grapes. Now, Joel chapter 3:13 also says, swing the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, trample the grapes, for the winepress is full. The wine vats overflow, because their wickedness is great. Swing your sickle, gather the clusters. So the angel does, and the sickle over the earth, and the grapes of the earth, and the winepress was trodden outside the city. They do not come into the great city. Now, Matthew 9, what is the city? Matthew 9, 35, 38. And Yahushua went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the Besorah of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted. This is the second time he says it. Because they fainted and were scattered. See, his people, when he was here, he gathered them unto him. The multitudes are scattered. They are the ones that remain in the field. They are the ones that remain amongst the tares. Right? They're scattered. So remember what broadcast means, to take your seed and to scatter it. So Yah has scattered the Gentiles of Ephraim, has scattered the Gentiles, the line of Ephraim, right? Yahushua came in to bring in his disciples, his elect, the election. And then they are to now go out into the fields, which it's symbolic. He even talks about it. He says the fields, the world is the fields. Matthew 13, 8. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. So the multitudes, that is the children of the kingdom, were scattered through all of the war and the famines and the schisms and all the things. So Yahushua brought in his lamed, his teachers, taught them, gave them the ruach, and then sent them out among wolves. So he says here that he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. Then said he unto his Talmudim, the harvest truly is plenteous, but the labors are few. Again he says, pray therefore Yah of the harvest, that he will send forth laborers. That's what Yahushua, he sent them out. Finally, Yahushua's harvest prophecy. Now in John chapter 4:35, it says, do you not say there are still 4 months and the harvest comes? See, I say to you, lift up your eyes and see the fields, for they are white for harvest already. John 4:36, he who is reaping receives a reward. and gathers fruit for everlasting life, so that both he who is sowing and he who is reaping rejoice together. Wow. Revelation 5:9-10. By your blood you purchased for Yahuah those from every tribe and tongue and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom of priests to serve our El, and they will reign upon the earth. One new man. Ephraim was grafted in. The Gentiles that he's talking about Ephraim is lost. The brothers Israel hated Joseph. Just like those who think they're Judah, they hate the Gentiles. They hate Ephraim. They're jealous because they knew that in the end, Ephraim would be honored and raised up like Joseph, like their father Joseph. He was raised up in the world. Egypt represented the world. And yet he was given esteem and honor. And so the Gentiles will have a seat of esteem and honor. Exodus 34:22. And you shall observe the Feast of Weeks, of the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering. So what we're focused on here is the word for weeks. So the word for weeks is Shabuah. Shabuah. It means to return, to be a sign or a signal or a distinguishing mark from the word Shabbat, which means to complete. It's where we get the word Sabbath, right? To complete what was sworn as an oath or declaration. So what is the oath or the declaration that was sworn, and who was it sworn to, that's going to become complete in order to return? Yah made an oath to Abraham, and he will gather Abraham's children. Father Abraham. Does that make sense? The sons of Abraham. Shavuot is a sign of something returning or yielding back. You reap what you sow. My seed will not return void, he says. Isaiah 55:11. So shall my word be that goes forth from my mouth. It shall not return to me void, but it shall accomplish what I please, and it shall prosper in the thing for which I sent it. Shavuot, the sheaves of Joseph's dream, marks the completion of an oath by returning something, especially by fulfilling the oath. Because now we have an assignment. And he says, this is how we're going to distinguish, right? That we're going to be the ones that are going to be qualified to do the greater works in order to bring Ephraim home, in order to bring the Gentiles in, because they're under the illusion, the witchcraft, the sorcery. There's a strong persuasion that is over them. Just like when Moses had to go in and against all of the authorities and the rulers in Egypt, and he had to contend for them to come out. Well, he had to have authority. He had to be able to do great signs and wonders, greater works. Well, they're also working in their false signs, miracles, and wonders. Remember the magi, the magicians, using their sorcery? So we're going to be given authority. So when I was sharing this in the beginning, oh my gosh, swarms of people signed up for the Bible study, right? This Hebrew roots, which I have nothing to do with anymore. I don't want nothing to do with that Hebrew cultic root thing. I want the truth. I keep the Sabbath, I honor his feasts, and I understand the spiritual implications. I love his word. I love his laws. I love his precepts. I love his ordinances. I love my king. I love his ruach. I love his wisdom. I am his. And I remember they were super like, yes. But then when we started getting into the foundation, I don't want it. I don't want it. Give me the gifts. Just give me the oil. But they didn't want to go buy it. Those were the false virgins. They said, give us some of your oil. But they didn't want to cultivate the olive trees. They didn't want to cultivate the olives. They didn't want to cultivate that oil. And so here we are almost a year in, and praise Yah, we're being cultivated because I believe that we're going to be the final harvest. Like we're going to bring in the final harvest. And it's going to require that we have a right mind so that we can execute proper justice and equity, so that we can redeem. And we're going to come in the book of Revelation and we're going to bring in that harvest, right? All right. So Shavuot, again, is a sign. Oh, let's talk about this real fast, the gathering. So remember that word we were talking about, Melo, when Jacob is blessing Joseph's sons? He says, your younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become the Melo of the nations. Well, Melo, the word that's used there, actually, is Melo ha-goim. Melo ha, the goim, the Melo, the fullness of the nations. Now, Melo means to be complete when the harvest is ripe, full, when the head of the wheat is full. That's when you are to reap the harvest of the wheat, because the head becomes full. So Melo means fullness or completeness as in its entirety. Fullness, that which fills. Handful, mass, multitude, entire content. That is to bring it to the fullness of time. It comes from the root word malah, which means to accomplish, to finish, to bring to an end by satisfying, or to mass themselves together as an army. Now, the second part is goyim, which is nations. It's plural. So we know again that he wasn't speaking specifically of Israel as a nation, but as nations, which would be the descendants of Abraham, thus of Israel and the nations. So the interesting thing is that the word's primitive root is ga'ah, which means to rise up, to grow up, to be exalted in triumph. Joseph grew up, 17, he grew up, a branch out of a stump, the stump of Jesse, right? Came Yeshua. So to rise up, to grow up, to be exalted in triumph, to be lifted up. There's Joseph's sheaves are lifted up and his brothers bow down to him. You see that? The same with Yahusha. Yahusha was raised sown in corruption, raised in honor. Yahusha was raised up from among the dead. You see? The flesh does not want to yield to the spiritual. It doesn't want to give glory. The flesh wants to, it's the tear. The flesh wants to rule. Like a child. It's to rule over the mother. Finally, the interesting thing is that this word's primitive root is ga'ah, right? I just rise up, to raise up. Now, the completeness and multitude of a people massed together and armed descendants of Abraham being exalted and lifted up in triumph. That's basically what it means together. The completeness and multitude of people massed together and armed, the descendants of Abraham, they are armed, being exalted and lifted up in triumph. So now let me show you something. Hold on. Let's close it out with this. This is so good. Let's go to Isaiah. Everybody turn your books, Isaiah 66:18. Isaiah 66:18. Who is he talking about here? So final judgment and glory. So remember, we saw the final judgment and the glory of the Lord. That's that word doxa, which is what Joseph was talking about in regard to his sheaves. You're going to bow down. You're going to give glory. You're going to give honor to me. And then we see this after the harvesting, that there's going to be a final judgment, and then Yah will be glorified. And then guess what else it says in the book of Revelation? When it's all in chapter 20, 22 through 22, it says that at the end, that there will be a new heaven, a new earth, a new Jerusalem, and that then the nations, the kings of the nations will come and give tribute. So it's going to be back and they're going to give thank offerings, right? So it says, for behold, Yahuwah will come with fire, because remember when they would go through the harvest, who knows what they would do with the chaff and all the wood and the hay and the stubble and all the junk. They would put it in the winnowing and they would take the seed. They would separate the seed from the hull. And then what would they do with all the extra stuff? It was called refuge. It was trash. So what would they put with the trash? They
Put
would
it in the fire.
Yeah, they put in the fire, gay. They'd burn it, would become fuel for the fire. So he says, for behold, Yahuwah will come with fire and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury and his rebuke with flames of fire. So that's going to be the wrath of the grapes, right? For by fire and by his sword will Yahuwah plead with all flesh, and the slain of Yahuwah shall be many. They that sanctify themselves and purify themselves in the gardens behind, one in the midst, eating swine's flesh, and the abomination and the mouse shall be consumed together, says Yahuwah. Watch this. For I know their works and their thoughts. It shall come that I will gather all nations and tongues, and they shall come and see my glory. And I will set a sign. Remember earlier we looked at that sign? To return, a sign or a signal, a distinguishing mark. And I will set a sign among them, and I will send those that escape of them unto the nations. They're going to have a sign. There's going to be something in them, and they will escape from all of these other nations. And then I will send them out. Look at this. I will send them out unto these nations to gather them. To where? Tarshish, Pul, and Lud, that draw the bow, to Tubal and Javan, to the isles afar off, that have not heard my fame, neither have seen my doxa, my glory, and they shall declare my glory among the Gentiles. Does anybody know where Paul was from? Tarshish. Very good. All right, let me show you something. So we now know why they were sent out. And they shall bring all your brethren. So who's going to be the offering? Your brethren, for an offering unto Yahuwah. Boom. Out of all the nations, your brethren, Ephraim, your brother, Joseph, Yeshua, your brother. They killed him. They killed their brother, right? They tried to throw him in a pit, but the pit couldn't hold him down. Remember we talked about that? An offering, they're going to be an offering. And it says here, an offering unto Yahuwah out of all nations, upon horses and chariots, and upon mules, and upon swift beasts, to my holy mountain. You're going to bring them to my holy mountain, says Yahuwah, as the children of Israel bring an offering in a clean vessel into the house of Yahuwah. But wait, and I will also take of them for priests and Levites, says Yahuwah. Boom. That's why Ephraim had to be adopted. That's why Manasseh had to be adopted. Because guess what? They're going to become, well, I'm going to show you. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, says Yahuwah, so shall your seed and your name remain. And may they be named after my name and the name of my fathers. Watch this. Let's go to Revelation 7, 9 through 15, everybody. And so after this, I beheld, look at that. And lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, salvation unto our El, which sits upon the throne, and unto the Lamb. And all the angels stood round about the throne and about the elders and the four beasts, and they fell before the throne on their faces and worshipped Elohim, saying, Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and honor and thanksgiving and honor and power and might. That's his glory that he promises will be seen in the end forever and ever. Amen. And one of the elders answered and said unto me, who are these that are in these white linen these white robes, these priests? And he said, where do they come from? And he said, well, I said unto him, sir, you know. And he said to me, these are they which came out of the great tribulation, and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore are they before the throne of Elohim, and they serve him day and night in his temple. And what did Isaiah say? And I will also take some of them for priests and Levites, says Yahuwah, and they shall serve me, verse 22, And it says, and all flesh shall come to worship before me, says Yahuwah. And so that's 9 through 15. And it says they serve him day and night, just like the priests in the temple. They serve him day and night in his temple. And he that sits on the throne shall dwell among them. And they shall hunger no more, and they shall thirst no more. Neither shall the sun light on them, nor any heat, for the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them, and shall lead them unto living fountains of water, and Elohim shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. Let's also go to Revelation 21:1, and we'll close there. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. So this goes back to Isaiah. And I will make a new heaven and I will make a new earth. 22. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, says Yahuwah, so shall your descendants and your name remain. There will be a new city, a new place of rule and government and legislation coming down from Elohim of the heavens, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. Now, we're going to close it with that, and you're going to have to just tune in to hear the rest.